Greetings, everyone. It's Louis Malmadrona here, and I'm introducing you to our interview with Neil Repkowski and the ensuing discussion. I want to say a few words about Neil. Um, Neil is one of the most knowledgeable people in the world, I believe, about Lakota culture and history. He's an almost fluent language speaker. Um, he has been to many Sundances, has done humblechias with esteemed elders, has led lodge ceremonies for many years, participated in UEP ceremonies, has sponsored a number of elders to come to Western New York where he lives, including one of our favorite elders, Warfield Moose, who is an amazing UEP leader. And we have deep respect for Neil, for his immersion in Lakota culture and language, and his knowledge of Lakota culture and language. Now, in the live session, some people criticized Neil because his ancestry is Polish, and they wanted to hear from real Native Americans. So, well, we love Neil, and we think Neil is an amazing person. And we decided to do an interview with Neil about the about how he coped with the AIDS epidemic, the HIV epidemic in the 1980s, when there was no treatment, because Neil was a physician working with HIV positive patients in the 1980s, and we wanted to talk to him about that experience and about um, the parallels that he sees between HIV and coronavirus, the current strain of coronavirus, I should say, because we thought he would have some amazing insight. And Neil lives in Western New York. We were on our way to a incredibly limited, socially distanced Sundance, and stopped in to talk to Neil, who is coming to that Sundance as probably the only singer at the dance, because we're having only 9 dancers, all socially distanced, um, well over 2 meters apart, and limiting, uh, and no one coming on the grounds. No supporters, spectators, audience, an incredibly limited dance to keep the traditions alive. And Neil knows more Lakota songs than anyone I know, regardless of their ancestry or origins. So we wanted to take this opportunity to talk to Neil, um, and we were so pleased that Neil agreed to uh, continue dialogue with us to help us improve our Lakota language skills with the weekly Zoom meeting afterwards. And what's really exciting is we're going to go back and forth between Lakota and French, since all of us also speak French. And maybe we'll invite some of our French friends to join us. So, so I should I should say that what um, you won't find the romantic Indian that many people are looking for, um, and and it's important to recognize that so many people in mainstream culture have an idea of Indians that is stuck in the 19th century, and we're not that way anymore. And um, I just want to mention one of my favorite Native American artists, who's Wendy Red Star, whose art is focused on that idea that of playing with cultural stereotypes and historical stereotypes and what modern Indians are like. I'm currently working on a scholarly article on the resistance and cultural art of Wendy Red Star. So I invite you to go to her website at www.wendyredstar.com and to see her incredible work. Neil also has a website at www.repkowski with the RZEPKOWSKI.com. And of course, we have a website. You can visit my website at www.mel-madrona.com and also our Coyote Institute website at www.coyoteinstitute.us. And Coyote Institute is one word run together. So you'll have to listen for the indigenous principles inherent in what Neil is saying. And you'll he's not going to come out and say, well, elders say to do X. He's going to embody those principles and present them. He'll talk about the importance of intention, the importance of relationship, the importance of where the medicine is gathered, the importance of prayer over the medicine, the importance of faith and hope and belief in the medicine. He'll talk about how to overcome negative energy that's imbued in the medicine from how it's produced or where it's produced. He'll talk about the power of attitude in healing. And these are incredibly important indigenous principles that Neil is bringing into the mainstream medical world. So I invite you to listen carefully for the indigenous principles that he enunciates, because he's not going to come out and say, elders say X. He's just not going to do that, because typically that's not how we do it. So, and I just mentioned that in the live session we were also criticized for not having indigenous women on the program, but we honor indigenous women. Our Sundance is called Honor the Mother. But this was an opportunity to interview Neil, who is a uniquely amazing, giving, knowledgeable, wise human being. And so I just invite you to enjoy Neil. And I do want to mention that this was our first attempt at socially distancing outdoor interviewing. And sadly, when I ask a question, my voice echoes. We didn't hear that when we were recording the interview. And when we played it back, since it's mostly Neil talking, we missed that section. So it's not a perfect video, but then it's not a perfect world. And we're all learning how to deal with life with coronavirus. So, and perhaps I should mention that will also be a message implicit in what Neil says, is that rather than go to war with coronavirus, we need to grapple with it and come to an understanding with it and a way to coexist with it, using insights from both cultures, including modern medicine. And so with that, I'll stop and we'll start the interview with Neil. So, hello everyone. Here we are with Neil Repkowski, my famous friend, whom I've known for more than 20 years, I think.
Could be, yeah, probably,
it's more than 20 years. And we have Barbara Mangy, my colleague and wife, and
hello,
esteemed collaborator, and Dr. Josie Conti.
Hey.
who's a faculty at Central Maine Medical Center's Family Medicine Residency. So, how exciting. We're sitting out in Cassadaga, New York, on Neil's porch with appropriate social distancing. All of us are at least 2 meters apart.
Yeah.
So we're not wearing masks, but that's the reason, because we're socially distanced. And we're here to have a conversation with Neil. And so I wanted to start by just inviting Neil to talk about his experiences when AIDS began to appear. And then we'll see what parallels we can draw to between COVID-19 and HIV, and we'll just keep the conversation going.
Well, back in 1981, just to give you a short recap of the history of AIDS, back in 1981, some gay men were getting Kaposi sarcoma and pneumocystis pneumonia, which was predictive of a compromised immune system. We really didn't see those things very much unless the doctors were compromising the immune system, like, for instance, to decrease it for avoiding a kidney plant rejection, etc. So very interestingly, these people were young gay people were showing up with conditions predictive of a poisoned immune system, basically, except that they weren't being poisoned with.
Sorry, Louis.
Okay. Okay.
Okay,
Sorry.
where were we?
Okay,
good.
We were talking about 1981.
Yeah, 1981. So first of all, some gay people showed up with diseases predictive of a compromised immune system, and the doctors were fascinated because they weren't compromising the system; it was being done all by themselves. So somehow these conditions. Of course, back then there was T-cell testing was basically a very experimental thing, wasn't widely available. So they named it gay-related immunodeficiency, GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency. Well, then some straight people from New York who happened to be IV drug users got the thing, and they weren't gay. So they had to change the name from gay-related immunodeficiency to somehow these people were acquiring immunodeficiency all by themselves without the help of chemotherapy or immune suppressants from doctors. So they changed the name to AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency, whether you were gay or not. At that time, there were 4 main groups that were prone to pick up this unusual condition, and what you had to have was a condition predictive of an underlying immune deficiency in your body. This was pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, disseminated cryptococcus, different things, disseminated candida, other conditions predictive of a lousy immune system. And it was called the 4-H Club. You were either homosexual, heroin user, hemophiliac, or Haitian, interestingly enough. And people were puzzled about the Haitian thing, but eventually they figured out that the people from Haiti were actually used as French speakers to go to the Belgian Congo at the time and teach the natives. And of course, at that time, Leopoldville, which is named after King Leopold in Belgium, which is now called Kinshasa, the capital of the Congo. But back then, Leopoldville was the center of the Congo where the Haitians were teaching, and the people from the bush would come in to the red light district and join the teachers from Haiti who were teaching, and they picked up HIV strains from there and went over to Haiti, and then gave blood, which was sent to the United States. And so the Haitians, basically, that's how they were implicated. They actually ended up coming back from Africa carrying the HIV with them. So it was a perfect storm. And then, of course, the transfusion in the United States started spread there, largely in the gay community at the time. Anyway, that's a little bit of a quick background on the 4-H Club. Back then, a lot of gay people were dying. Of course, there was no cure or even treatment for it. And rumors started to fly that this was a Russian plot that was planted in the United States to kill off the gay people. And then it was a plot by the United States to kill off the IV drug users. I mean, there was all kinds of different propaganda, conspiracy theories, which of course blossom parallelly or in parallel with the COVID thing. There's all kinds of conspiracy theories. Instead of Russia, now it's China. China did this to wipe us out, and but it's the same dynamic. People want to explain things and they come up with these crazy conspiracy things which stoke fear. People love fear. That's why they go to horror movies. And I think the conspiracy theories are the same thing. So back when AIDS was around, it was a Russian plot, or the United States uh, engineered the virus to get rid of the homosexual and IV drug population. And then it was vaccine experimentation that created it, and it was hepatitis B vaccine was contaminated with the HIV. All kinds of theories, which of course none of which were true. I remember early on, before we really had good medicine for HIV, we had AZT out and things in the late 80s, but around the late 80s or early 90s, there was a conference, I think it was in Geneva, Switzerland, the World AIDS Conference, and there was a demonstration. And the demonstrators outside the conference were saying that aspirin was the cure for AIDS, but it was being withheld because the pharmacy companies wanted to make a lot of money with the new AZT and things that were out. And there's a partial truth to that, because aspirin inhibits NF-kappa B, which is a kind of a growth regulator for HIV. So there is a partial truth to it, but it certainly wasn't a cure. But they took this little kernel of truth and they turned it into a big plot. Same thing with COVID. The kernel of truth is, with COVID, you get some disseminated intravascular coagulation, which you can help avoid with a little bit of aspirin. So they took that truth, and the same thing, they're taking. There's a plot that the pharmaceuticals want to make a lot of money, the pharmacy companies, and so they're suppressing the use of aspirin. Well, in fact, there's a kernel of truth to that, but it's not true. So it just stokes the theories. So there's a lot of parallels in what happened with HIV and what's happening with COVID. And we're looking now with HIV, we have good treatments, and even treatments that can be used to prevent picking it up. I think eventually, certainly we don't have a vaccine for HIV, which has been researched for 20 some years, well, almost 30 years. So I don't know if we never have a vaccine for COVID because it changes so much. I mean, it may be partially successful, but I think we're going to get some medicines. We're going to know how to treat better. We already do. We know that a little bit of steroid helps, and we know that rosuvastatin helps. So that's important. Time to edit, right? Yeah. I was saying they were working on a vaccine for HIV, which they still don't have after 25 plus years. So we may or may not get a vaccine for COVID, for the coronavirus strain. And the strain does mutate, just like HIV mutates. There's different, what are called clades, or different groups of mutations. So will we have a vaccine that's 100% effective? Never. But maybe it'll help. But just like with HIV, we don't have a vaccine for HIV, but we have good treatments now with very few, if any, side effects for most people. So probably for COVID, we're better able to treat it. We know that a little steroid helps, and we know even, like we were saying, hydroxychloroquine might be useful to some degree. But I think as we refine our medications, rosuvastatin, there's different things. We will get a better handle on this and be able to treat people before they get really sick with it, which will be useful. Of course, nothing is 100% effective. Same with HIV. I mean, we've got it really under control, but the thing is finding it, treating it before it gets the best of you. And I think it's the same with coronavirus, which has a little bit quicker incubation than, of course, HIV, which can sit there for 10 years asymptomatically. Coronavirus, I think it's 2 to 3 weeks. So more studies will show. So what else were we talking about there? Oh yeah, the studies with hydroxychloroquine, and some of the studies show it helps, some don't help. It depends on how you set the study up. You can almost set up a study to show anything you want if you're a little biased
Indeed.
against it. People are anti-vaccine, and one guy years ago published that measles vaccine was associated with autism, and it got into the Lancet. And when people looked at his data, he had an agenda and fudged the factors to prove his point. When in fact there's no association with measles vaccine and autism, but that because it made the journals back then, people still remember it. And I always say first impressions are lasting impressions. And once you get it in your head, it's hard to get it out of the head, even if you have evidence that contradicts your first impression. I think that's a little bit what we're seeing with, we were talking about the political spins, for instance, on hydroxychloroquine. Trump said it would help. Then studies showed it didn't help, so people republished those studies and really made a big deal out of it, mainly because they wanted to get at Trump, when in fact other studies show it does help to some degree. So, there's a lot of political spin on this, just like with HIV, it was spun to fit people's political agenda.
And you were talking too about, other aspirin and intravenous vitamin C and those.
Yeah, so there was a demonstration back, I think it was in the early 90s. There was an international AIDS conference in Geneva, and the demonstrators outside were claiming that aspirin was the cure for AIDS, and it was being suppressed by the pharmaceutical companies who wanted to make money on fancy drugs. And there was a kernel of truth to that, because aspirin does have a mechanism interaction with NF-kappa B, which is a regulator of HIV growth in the cells. So, but it's not a cure. And so similar to COVID, aspirin is an antithrombotic. In other words, it helps prevent little clots in your system. And part of COVID's problem is that it causes these little clots in the system, creating little micro strokes, little heart attacks, little poor circulation in the feet, which causes a rash in your feet. So aspirin will help that to an extent, but it's certainly not a cure. So of course, you can expect demonstrations saying that pharmaceutical companies are suppressing the cure for COVID, which is aspirin. And actually, there's COVID-19 is the end result of the virus, which is called SARS-CoV-2, which is SARS coronavirus 2. Just like HIV causes AIDS, SARS coronavirus 2 causes COVID-19. So there's a confusion in that, and there will be, just like with AIDS. There's a confusion. Well, you have AIDS. No, I'm just HIV positive. Well, then you have AIDS. It's like you have coronavirus COVID. You have coronavirus. SARS coronavirus 2. No, you have COVID-19. It's confusing to the public. It's even confusing to the medical people.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that the Chinese reported benefit from IV vitamin C for hospitalized patients and PO vitamin C for prevention. And we haven't picked up on that at all in this country.
Yeah, well, that Linus Pauling thing, vitamin C, it does help viruses to a point. And it's parallel, reminds me of vitamin C being touted IV for HIV as well. Mm-hmm. And I did have a patient who was all over the place, and he was into natural remedies and all kinds of stuff. He was taking coenzyme Q and everything. So he wanted me to give him IV vitamin C, which I did. I gave him IV vitamin C and IV multiple vitamins, everything like that. Even injected pure vitamin C solution into his Kaposi's lesions. I did that sub-Q, It didn't do anything, except very interestingly, and I asked the lab about this, because I would do labs after I gave him all that IV vitamin C, and his cholesterol went down to like 6, which is like, what? It's got to be interfering somehow with his cholesterol measurement. But they claimed that the vitamin C didn't affect the cholesterol assay. So I thought, well, then that proves that there's something with vitamin C and lifting cholesterol plaques from the body, because it basically got rid of all the cholesterol. It was amazing. So that's the only interesting thing I found. But of course he's passed on now. Vitamin C didn't do anything for his AIDS or his Kaposi sarcoma, even with intralesional injections, which back then were thought to be useful. So, I have an experiment of one. uh,
It reminds me, back in the 80s, I was part of a trial of typhoid vaccine.
oh,
And
yes.
the theory was developed by Heimlich, who invented the Heimlich maneuver, of course. And
Uh-huh.
his idea was that if you stimulate the immune system, you can boost it. And so we were giving injections of typhoid vaccines to induce a fever. That was our goal, was to induce a fever. And of course, we figured out that it actually didn't do anything.
Yeah, I have a colleague who was an HIV doctor at the time who was injecting himself with tetanus boosters all the time for his immune system. He's still around, by the way. So
Well, the interesting thing I was telling you earlier was that we did get a response to the typhoid vaccine, and out of, I think it was 140 patients, 17 continued to manifest the response, and over years. And so we figured out that there is such a thing as a placebo effect or a self-healing response with HIV.
and again, we were talking about this earlier. There's an individual condition where an individual will benefit from a treatment and not really, I don't think, placebo, and another individual will not benefit from the same treatment. For example, I was meditating and what's called a mastermind group. You call into your mind people who know what they're doing. And so I had this mastermind group, and I asked them, for me back in 1990 actually. It was early 90 when AZT was first coming out as treatments, and I had HIV. I probably picked up HIV. It had to be in 1982 or earlier, and the reason is in 1983 we knew whatever was causing this condition was a virus and was spread by blood and body fluids. And well, we didn't know it was a virus. We knew whatever it was spread by blood and body fluids. So in 1983, that's when healthcare workers and dentists and IV technicians universally started using gloves and universal precautions. And so I used gloves on all sexual fluids, so we started using condoms. So in 1983 was the time I started using gloves and condoms. Before that, I wasn't using condoms or gloves. So, and most likely I picked it up from sexual encounter without condoms. But I had to have been infected in 1982. The test was not invented, the antibody test, until July of 1985 for the public. So in July of 1985, I took it and was HIV positive, with the antibodies back in July of 85. Never forget the day I opened the result. But I figured I picked it up. It had to be 82 or before. So, I'm HIV positive now, 37 years, over half my life. I'm 68. So, but anyway, so I was asking in 1990 in this meditation group, I asked my mastermind group, I said, what can I do to help myself survive with HIV? Because the medicines had bad side effects and everything. And what they showed me was a field of grain. And I know what grain looks like. And I knew it wasn't oats, because that's a different kind of looking grain. I knew it wasn't rice. It looked like either wheat, rye, triticale, or barley, all which have these bearded little seeds. So rice, triticale, barley, wheat, And as soon as I asked that in my mind, I saw underneath 7 round loaves of bread. And it reminded me, there's a parable in the Bible about 7 barley loaves that were multiplied for a crowd by Jesus. So I thought, okay, this is barley. So I thought, well, Spirit must want me to take barley. So I bought barley cereal, which was muesli. I made barley broth soup, which I didn't think from Spirit that's pointing you in the direction of something that's helpful. You'll get a confirmation. So within less than 2 weeks, out of the blue, this woman calls me. Her name was Kathy O'Jude. I still remember her name. I never met the woman, never talked to her but once. But she said, I heard you have HIV and I have something I want to tell you about, network marketing. And I'm going, oh no, not network marketing. What are you trying to sell me? She said, it's called barley green. And I thought, barley green, tell me more about that. So I bought barley green, and it's basically young barley plants that are juiced and dehydrated into a powder. It tastes like lawnmower juice. So, so I started taking barley green. I didn't do network marketing with that. I just took it. And my T cells, which were able to be measured back then, by 91, we had T cell testing and viral load testing yet, but my T cells went up. So I continued to take barley green once or twice a day. And as the later, I had a viral load that was smoldering, but I think I have to credit the barley green with helping my immune system. After a couple of years on it, I decided one summer that, well, you know, we're doing, I was on medical trials and things with different medicines. So I stopped the barley green. T cells went down. So I went back on it. And I said, well, you know, maybe this will help some of my patients. So I gave my patients barley green. I think 2 out of 10 that I gave it to, it helped a little bit, but it didn't help like it helped me. So we'll go to individual therapy that works. Since then, of course, we have really good medicines for HIV. So I stopped the barley green regularly, although I still take it about once a week. So, you know, individual therapy. And another anecdote, you know, I was telling Lewis earlier, I was working at the Fenway Community Health Center in Boston. Back in, this was 1990, 91. I had a patient who was a hefty, young, good-looking gay man who lived in San Diego, but he developed what's called cryptosporidial diarrhea, of which there was no cure back then. And he ended up from being, I think he was 190 pounds, went down to 130 and went back to his family in Boston basically to die. Me at General Hospital, and finding that he had cryptosporidial diarrhea. He was on tincture of opium and paregoric and all these opioids to help constipate him. He was still having 12 watery bowel movements a day, losing weight. So I did my best to help care for him. But 2 weeks before Christmas, he came in with a hemoglobin of like 6.5. And I said, you know, you need, I mean, his blood was practically water. I said, you need a transfusion. We'll put you in Beth Israel, give you a transfusion. And, you know, you're not getting any food. You're not going to build up your hemoglobin unless we IV feed you. And he said, and he came in with his father because he was too weak to come in by himself. His father brought him in a wheelchair. And he said, I'll do anything you ask if I can just spend the weekend with my family, because before and then I came home. So I looked at the father and I said, you want to do anything? And for some reason in my head popped Casey's castor oil remedy, which is basically a topical application of castor oil on the stomach. So I said, you know, have him watch TV, lean him on the floor, put a heating pad with castor oil over his right upper quadrant, and do that over the weekend, and bring him in on Monday, and we'll get the transfusion set up. Well, I have so many patients. I forgot he missed his appointment on Monday. They actually called and changed it, and then they changed it again, unbeknownst to me. You know, I'd forgotten about him. And 2 weeks later, I walked right past him in the waiting room because he had gained weight and was complaining for the first time of constipation after so many years of diarrhea. I couldn't believe it. He was basically cured of cryptosporidial diarrhea. So I had 2 other patients at that time with the same thing. I gave him the castor oil pack recommendations, didn't work. But for him, it worked because it popped into my head right at the opportune time. It was a miracle. So, so individual therapies beyond placebo, I think, are something that probably now, we were talking about gene identification. Maybe now we have DNA fingerprints. We can maybe individualize therapies that may work for one person, but not for everybody.
And it's sort of mainstream medicine would trivialize sort of spirit-guided therapies, and yet
that was definitely
yeah. And we've both seen that. We've both gotten really seemingly strange messages that we've given to people, and they've done them, and it's worked. I mean, I remember once telling someone to eat watermelon for 30 days, and she said, why? And I said, I don't know. It just came to me.
Yeah.
And she actually did it, which may have been what cured her more than the watermelon, was the fact that she did it.
Yeah.
And she was amazingly better at the end of the days. And we've all seen that.
Yeah.
And yet it's minimized by, mainstream medicine, which only accepts randomized control trials.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is applicable to a large group, but not to an individual.
Right,
Yeah. Yeah,
right.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
There are some I mean, women's breast cancer has been really helped by genetic testing and
Yeah.
genetic testing of the tumors and knowing what kinds of what you're dealing with there. So there is something. So there is something, in that idea of individualized medicine, but also the genetic component to be able to look at the signatures, another piece of information. I suppose.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, but
I think the
Yeah. One more
Oh, yeah, yeah.
anecdote. I had this was when I came back from Boston. I was right here in this county, caring for HIV positive patients. And I had a female cabinet maker who also had cryptosporidial diarrhea. It was very, I obviously hindering her lifestyle. Tried the castor oil pack, didn't work. So all of a sudden in my head popped tincture of walnut, which is an anti-parasitic. And I just happened to have gone to the Serpent Mound in Ohio, which is a sacred place. And all over the Serpent Mound grow these black walnut trees. And I collected black walnut hulls from the Serpent Mound and made a tincture of walnut. I happened to have it. So when I was treating her, in my mind popped, give her tincture of walnut. So I took some of the walnut preparation I had prepared from the Serpent Mound, which is spiritually charged, interestingly enough, and I gave her like a cup of tincture of walnut. And I said, I don't know why, but I said, take a quarter of a teaspoon once a day of this and see what happens with your diarrhea. Fixed. She was able to have one bowel movement a day after that. So she lived for another year with cryptosporidial diarrhea being controlled with tincture of walnut. She had, unfortunately, she had AIDS wasting and knew her time was coming to an end, although she was more comfortable with her bowel movements. And it was sweet. She was a cabinet maker, and she made me a sun, moon, and stars party before she passed. I still have it out to you. But yeah, but for her, making her more comfortable, it popped in my head. And I've tried tincture of walnut for other people, it doesn't work. But for her, it worked. But the castor oil packs did not. So it's interesting how spirit individualizes therapy. Amazing.
Yeah, and it somehow the traditional elders knew that.
Yeah.
I remember going to a conference with a traditional elder who, we were on a panel, and there was a nurse in the audience, and she asked him, so how do you treat arthritis? And he said, well, I don't know her. Why don't you bring her around to my house tomorrow, and I'll let you know.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And certain preparation, like I mentioned, this tincture of walnut was collected in a certain way in a certain place. So you can say, oh, well, we'll just take some walnut hulls and make tincture of walnut. It may not work. There's a walnut tree right there. And I've made tincture of walnut from that tree, which is growing on sacred land. So, and it's sitting in my refrigerator. So if anybody has diarrhea during this time, I'll give them some tincture of walnut and see what happens.
Well, there's a wonderful, Eduardo Duran, who he's a psychologist. He's a Buffalo gentleman, and he was talking about ingesting spirits, and in his case, he was talking about the spirits, and he was talking about substance use, and he was talking about the way something is prepared, especially cocaine or heroin in war zones in these secretive ways, in back alleys. Do you want that spirit in your body? Do you want so part of that what you just remind me that knowing where it comes from, knowing how it was grown was a real piece of the medicine.
Yeah, there's a story about a medicine man who anyway, somebody was bleeding, very bad nosebleed, and nothing was stopping it. So they took him to the medicine man, and the medicine man did a ceremony, and he said, I don't know if I can help you, but there's a certain herb. You go out and look, and if it glows, it will work. That one glowing, so it will appear differently. Then so the person went out, the wife of the person went out and saw the herb growing, and it was in various places, but it wasn't glowing. But one spot, it was glowing, and she took that, and it worked. So even and I was telling Lewis the other day, I was in a sweat lodge ceremony, and we had a stone that that gave off acrid odor, and everybody was coughing, and they said, "What kind of medicine can we use?" And of course, I was berating myself because I didn't have the traditional prairie sage. All I had was sage from my garden. And for some reason, I had it on the altar. So I thought, well, it's better than nothing. So I just gave garden sage, which I don't put much stock in, but it was there. And I passed it around. People chewed a little bit of it. There wasn't one single cough the entire rest of the lodge. And it taught me that what you need is made available at that time in that place under those circumstances from the spirits to work. And you can say, well, it'll work other times. No, just like the castor oil packs or the tincture of walnut, it worked for those people at that time, but other people in other circumstances didn't work. So I think medicines are infused with spirit energy sometimes for a specific purpose. But if you take the same plant that's not infused or not growing in the right place,
just not related to viruses, but one of the reasons I thought that the Premarin study turned out so badly is that Premarin, that it gave, heart disease and stroke was from the way that it's prepared, by torturing pregnant horses. And keeping them tortured and in stalls and just terrible conditions to make Premarin. And that's got to do something to the medicine.
Right.
It's got to make it harmful. When that's the energy that's going into it. And it's funny that there's no money, really, because I know people who've tried to get money, mostly naturopaths, to study plant-based estrogens, for postmenopausal conditions. There's no money in that.
Yeah.
I guess because plants are too cheap.
Yeah, it must be. They're too natural. Yeah.
Just to trouble the idea of
Okay.
So there's plenty of aspirin, out of a bottle can help as a blood thinner, and there are some medicines that work in predictable ways. Not every single medicine. So are we going to imagine that the factory where it was made is somehow a better, more humorous factory than the factory?
Well, that's a good point. And here's what I used to tell my HIV patients, because I saw this early on treating HIV. The patients who believed that the medicine was to make pharmaceutical companies money and was a poison and took it anyway did not do well. But I said to other patients that take this medicine, look at it, thank it for what it can do, and take it in a positive way, that this medicine is coming to bless me. And people did much better with the same medicine. So, you're mentioning where it's coming from the factory. You can actually negate the vibrations by infusing it with a prayer. And I think you then get rid of wherever it came from. Mm-hmm. And by doing it in a proper way with prayer, you increase its potency. I've seen this, and people who took the medicine saying, this has had research so that it will help people, and so I'm going to take it because it can help me do much better. The attitude, people with a positive attitude and looking optimistically do much better than people with a negative attitude. I'll tell you another story. I had a patient, his name was Dennis. I'll share the first name. He had a terrible attitude about HIV. He would come in, this is when I was working in the Erie County Medical Center in Buffalo, and nobody could do anything right for him. He would come in and he had a chip on his shoulder. HIV was it was a plot from the government to kill off gay people, and nobody understood him, and nobody could do anything right. And the nurses would take his blood pressure, and they couldn't do it right, and he was just grumpy. And then I would see him and I'd say, Dennis, your attitude is going to kill you, not the HIV. Oh, it's not, And the nurses, he got so bad, he was so well known, the nurses would say, Dennis is here, you take care of him. The nurses didn't even want to go and do his weight or blood pressure. So I would go and take care of him. And I would always say, Dennis, your attitude is killing you. Well, one day he came in a wheelchair because he was wasting away and getting worse and worse. So his friend brought him in a wheelchair, and he had what we call the look. I don't know if you've ever heard that. The look. You have the look. Everybody looked at Dennis, sunken eyes, respirations. I said, Dennis, you have the look. And he goes to me, what's the look? I said, I was trying to be nice. I said, well, the look means you're going to die within 6 weeks. He said, 6 weeks, huh? He says, can I go on a cruise? I said, really, the look means 2 weeks. So I was trying to be nice and said 6 weeks. So I said, I'm thinking I'm sending a dead man on the boat. But I said to him, can you go on the cruise within the next week? He said, yeah. I said, do you have somebody to wheel you on with your oxygen tank and everything? Yeah. He said, okay, go do it within the next week. Because I thought, I'm going to send this man dead on the boat. So, and I said, and after your cruise, come back. So 3 weeks later, he comes back. He's still alive, and he didn't have the look anymore. I said, Dennis, you look better. I said, what happened? He said, I have 4 weeks. He said, I have 3 weeks left, right? Because I told him 6 weeks. So he's counting. He says, I have 3 weeks left. I said, yeah. He said, well, he said, on the cruise, he said, you told me I only had 6 weeks. He said, so I thought, I'm not going to worry about anything. I'm just going to have a good time and just enjoy life. And he started to enjoy life. And it changed his entire attitude because he thought he only had 3 more weeks. Well, I saw him after that and he was looking better. I said, Dennis, your attitude has changed. You're going to live longer. He says, you're right. He said, I learned my lesson. He said, and from there, his total attitude toward life changed. He started the neighborhood block club in his neighborhood, started inviting people over, was a positive person, lived 2.5 more years before he was a real heavy smoker and basically got cryptococcal meningitis after 2.5 more years. But he had a wonderful life for 2.5 years after changing his attitude, and he would have been dead. And I've seen this. I mean, he was an extreme example, but I've seen this with patients. I myself, I have a positive attitude, and here I am, 38 years later, still living. And I told my patients, I said, look, I'm an example for you. Look at my attitude. Look at what I'm doing. If I can do this, you can do this. And people who believe me, they're still around. People who are a negative attitude, and it could have been Dennis, would be gone by now.
Well, and I think that's so relevant to coronavirus because, it's like the days of AIDS. We're facing uncertainty. We don't know if we'll get it. We don't know if we won't. And if we get it, we don't know if we'll even notice it. Or if we'll end up on a ventilator in the ICU.
Yeah.
And so we have to look at how do we approach uncertainty, like with a positive attitude, with prayer, with communicating with the spirits, or with pessimism. I have a patient who is barricaded in her house on Long Island. And she hasn't left her house in 4 months. And she is the most fearful, frightened person. And I thought, well, if anyone could get it through the mail, it would be her.
Yes.
Because she's so scared.
Yeah.
And we know that fear is bad for your immune system.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It creates fear and the unknown. It's really bad. Talking about fear, it's a funny story. I had a woman come to me when I was treating people in Boston for HIV and AIDS. And I would share with my patients that I'm HIV positive, And this one woman came and she had such a fear of HIV and AIDS. I don't want to be near anybody. But I developed a good patient-doctor relationship with her, And finally, I had to tell her. I said, "Look, you're killing yourself." I said, "I have something you may not want to have me as your doctor anymore." Why is that? I said, "Because I'm HIV positive." You are, and it's like, but she knew me by then, so it was okay. And then she was okay with HIV after that. So it's interesting how relationships can help heal. Just relationships.
Yeah. And this is something that I think indigenous healers have known for thousands of years. And yet, we've forgotten it in modern medicine. Like, we
Yeah.
don't appreciate the importance of attitude and relationship and being positive and the energy of the
Yeah.
situation.
One thing I was taught in medical school by the old family doctors, they said, with women, he said, they can be sick and they're ready for discharge within the next couple of days when they start putting their makeup back on. It's so true.
Yeah.
It's a good sign.
The little things sometimes
Positive.
tell us so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
But collectively, I was thinking about the stages of grieving, the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross naming some stages of grieving, and how it's never like a straight line from, blaming and anger, and it's these little cycles that we go through. And I think with social media too, it's really fear-based. You can kind of amplify that, or you can plug into a different kind of collective and grasp hope. But as a nation, we're so we're in these still in a little bit of disbelief, right? Some people, the people who are saying this is a hoax, and other people are saying, well, no, with just basic hygiene, masking, hand washing, you can really continue to live a distance and carry on with some life, being safe. But I think as a collective, we are cycling through these phases of grieving, and hopefully, I don't know, with the use of plugging into the right people and spirit, or maybe unplugging from social media and being a little more connected with those who are directly around you, find a little more hope there.
Yeah, social media, I'm telling you, the stuff I get there, the propaganda, I call it propaganda, which has a negative connotation. Propaganda simply means you're biased and you're trying to have other people pick up your bias and share it and spread it. But some of that says, it's a plot, or it's a hoax, it's a hoax, and masks don't do anything. There's a lot of confusion around a lot of stuff. Some of these, I've listened to an hour of propaganda. People keep sending me this stuff, and then I take notes and I say, well, this fact is distorted. This is lifted from the truth. This is out of context, and they say, some of these doctors are saying, masks are no good. Studies show masks can kill you. Well, I went to look on the study. There's no study that shows masks can kill you, but because a recognized doctor says it on a film, studies show that. What studies? There's none that show that. But there, and of course, if you think about it, there's people don't die by wearing masks. Theoretically, you can get hypercapnia a little bit, which is increased CO2. Breathing in a paper bag works better than breathing in a mask. Theoretically, you don't release as much heat, so you could maybe overheat a little bit easier, but really you don't die from using a mask. And then there's another statement by a doctor, you're breathing in your own germs, so you can get sick. Well, if they're your own germs, you have antibodies against them anyway. So it doesn't make logical sense. But when you're a layperson listening to this doctor tell you this, you become automatically paranoid. I have one woman who comes to Sundance, actually, and she doesn't want to wear a mask. So she listens to all this stuff and makes it her truth that this is why you don't want to wear a mask. And I'm thinking, you're going on false statements here. And I wrote very detailed why that was. So she won't believe me. There's no studies. First impressions, you can't tell me differently. This is what they said. This is what I believe. It supports my not wanting to wear a mask. So I'm not going to take the truth, or I'm going to believe that there are studies when there aren't. It's interesting how people react.
Yeah. I've done the same thing. I've looked for studies. Who's saying this and where did they publish it?
Yeah,
and,
they say. Who's they?
And they have links. But
yeah.
The link will be to like an advertisement or something. The link won't go anywhere. It looks very professional. And also, I like to remind people that a doctor doing an operation might wear a mask for 8 hours. So if you really think that after hour 6 your doctor is losing it because of ingesting carbon dioxide, then you're going to rethink that operation. There's if you have something really wrong with you, then what are you going to do? Because you want him breathing on you, or would you rather he had the mask on?
Yeah. It's crazy. Some of the stuff circulating on the internet, and people believe this stuff. Incredible.
Well, you know, a big,
Well, you know, a big,
um, well, a
well,
common
a common
hypnotic
hypnotic
technique is to say
is to say
research has
research has
shown
shown
that,
that,
Oh,
and then
perfect.
you just
Absolutely. And
say
what
anything you
research?
want.
you want.
Exactly. Oh, and that's what this was a surgeon talking about masks, and he said studies show people die from wearing masks. It's got more drawbacks than benefits, which is totally not true. But it's a surgeon saying it, so
Right.
Yeah, too bad
Yeah, too
no
incredible.
one
bad
asked him
no one asked him
how long he
how long he
wore a mask
wore a
for
mask
Wore a
for
surgery.
mask for his
surgery.
own surgery.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, but he was like, and he was all fired up about it. So of course that'll get you all fired up about. Well, we must be. That's right. It's incredible. And you're right. It's like a mass hypnosis, really. And social media is a wonderful way to hypnotize a lot of people into believing wrong things. So, in the old days, just because it's written doesn't make it's true. Just because it's on social media, probably it's not true. So you want to really
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's so
take
true.
care.
yeah,
The,
so true.
and you know,
And
I
you know,
have I
I
use
I
Facebook
use
mostly to
Facebook mostly to
send out
send out
information about
information
things that
about
I'm
things
doing,
that I'm doing.
and so I
And
have
so I have
um,
um,
friends that would
friends that
never
would
be
never
my
be my
friends if
friends
they
Yeah.
that
knew me,
knew me.
and it's
And it's
shocking some of
shocking
the
some of
things
the
that they
things that they
post.
post.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I'm telling you. And what I've learned is, you try to counteract some of these propaganda posts, and I send the facts to the people, and they keep the next propaganda post. I keep getting shared. What do you think of this? No, they
Yeah.
just don't get it. It's frightening, actually, in a way. We have to be, objective more.
So one of the
So one of
interesting
the
things that
interesting things
maybe
that
we could
maybe
speak
we
to
could speak
is
to
that
is that
those of the four of us
the
sitting
four of
here
us sitting here
are we
are
believe in
we believe in
hardcore science,
hardcore science,
but we also
but we
believe
also
in
believe in
spirits.
spirits. You know,
And
and
maybe you could speak a
maybe
little
you
bit.
could speak a
It's
little
too
bit.
wide
It's
seeing at
too
its
wide
best, I
seeing at
think.
its best, I think.
You know
Yeah.
You know
that we want.
that we
You
want.
know,
You know,
we.
we.
I mean,
I
I
mean,
do
I do
believe that
believe that
medicine
medicine
eventually
eventually
gets it
gets it
right,
right,
slowly but
slowly but
surely.
surely.
Sometimes a
Sometimes
lot
a lot
slower than I
slower than
want,
I want,
Yeah.
but
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 it's trial
it's
and
trial and
error.
error. You know,
Sure.
And
and
um,
um,
I'm
I'm
I'm critical
I'm critical
of medicine
of
frequently
medicine
because I
frequently
think
because I think
we don't always
we don't
look at
always
our
look
own
at our own
evidence.
evidence.
And
Right.
some of
And
my
some of my
pet criticisms are
criticisms are
statins.
statins.
Not
Not
everyone should
everyone
be on
should
a
be on a
statin.
statin.
Yeah.
And
And
I have
I have
others, but
others.
not every
Not every
labor should
labor
be
should be
induced.
induced.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
so I've
Yeah.
got
So I've
some
got some
criticisms,
criticisms,
but I
but
think
I think
there's data
there's
to
data to
support those
support those
criticisms.
criticisms.
It's
It's
data that
data that
people are
people are
ignoring
ignoring
for
for
political and
political and
potentially
potentially
economic
economic
reasons.
reasons.
Yeah. And medicine has their own myths. I mean, when I was in medical school back in the 70s, stress that caused ulcers. And if I would have said to my teachers, and they Lori is definitely involved in ulcers. That being said, reminds me of the argument. I can't remember his name, but he and Pasteur had a big argument about germs causing disease, and I can't remember his name again with a B. Anyway, so was right that germs cause some illnesses, but other people can have the same germs and not get ill. For instance, a lot of people carry in their nasal passages meningococcal disease, which can cause meningitis, but yet they carry it without meningitis and without symptoms. So it's the parable of the sower with the seed. It's this, which would be the germs falling on fertile ground, which is the conditions to have the disease manifest, versus seeds falling on rocks or whatever. So is germs that might cause disease or certain sicknesses, but it's the lay of the land or the fertility, the invitation, as people can carry those germs around and not get sick. Or it's the same with COVID, actually. You get the virus, people carry around that. Some people get sick, other people don't. What is the underlying predisposition to it? Or miasma, I guess you call it homeopathy. What's the underlying predisposition? Well, age, immunocompromised to begin with. You have a position, and there's genetics involved in some of this as well. which reminds me of another thing. The Navajos really got affected with COVID versus their outlying communities of white people. Same thing with back in the day, smallpox. Smallpox would hit white people, and we'd get over it more often than the natives who got hit with the same thing. So there's got to be a genetic predisposition to certain groups genetically, as well as, of course, clinically. I mean, whether they have the age or underlying immune problems. So I think the lay of the land is important for COVID-19 to manifest or not. So we have all of this individualization in a way because of various conditions. So good point.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting probably close to the end because you need to work on your
I
house.
do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And does anyone have any
Yeah.
thoughts before we call it a day?
Before we,
Um, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
To be
yeah.
continued
Before we
offline.
stop,
Yeah. Yeah.
have you heard anything from
Have
any
you
of
heard
our
anything
Lakota
from
friends
any
about
of our
this whole
Lakota
COVID,
friends about
their response to this
their
whole
response to this whole
COVID-19?
Well, the Pine Ridge is on lockdown. And first of all, the Cheyenne River, Standing Rock, Pine Ridge, a lot of these wanted to be on lockdown early, and the governor said no.
Mhm.
Well, Indians are a sovereign people, and they have every right to as we talking about the negative experience with smallpox back in the day, and it could affect them worse than the white population. They have ever to lock down their reservations, and in fact, they have. Pine Ridge now has 115 cases, and so they've been off and on lockdown. So it's a problem, and they have every right to sell.
All right. Well, I want to thank you,
Well, I
Neil,
want to
for
thank you, Neil, for
taking time away
taking
from
time away
repairing
from
your
repairing
house
your house
to
Okay.
talk with us. Yeah, yeah. I
I'm
think
gonna leave.
thank you for watching this interview with Neil. I'd like to summarize some of the key indigenous principles that were discussed. First, where the medicine comes from and how it's prepared is important in terms of what it does. That, as Neil was saying, the black walnut medicine, which came from sacred ground, was more effective, he thinks, than commercially produced black walnut medicine. And I think that's certainly true, that it's more powerful to make your own medicine than to buy the medicine that somebody else makes. And in our at our home, we're trying to grow all of our own medicines right there on the spot for our use in ceremony and healing. And so I invite you all to consider that it's more powerful to make your own medicine with prayer and intention than it is to buy it from someone else. Neil also talked about, of course, related to this, that intention in general is incredibly important, and the importance of attitude and belief. Believing that what you're doing will help you is very important, and having a positive attitude is important. Fear is immunosuppressive, and we talk about how one must face one's fears, look to the West and face one's fears in order to make the healing journey. So fear is unproductive. And Neil talked about um, praying over your medicine and said how that can remove negative energy that might have come from the factory or from how it was distributed and produced. And that taking it with a positive intent is really important, and he gave examples about that. So, I hope that you all caught many of the indigenous principles that Neil espoused. Power of relationship, of course, being very important. And of course, we're all engaged in continual ceremony, and we believe that this dialogue with the spirit world um, can potentially help us. Of course, they don't have to help us. So we try and present in a good way, with a good heart, with good intention, and ask their help, which is also something Neil talked about. So thank you for joining our program. Stay safe, stay well, practice social distancing, and someday there'll be good treatments for coronavirus, just as there are for HIV. Thank you.